Yes, everyone, you know what time it is. It's your boy Jack here at the Irish Hotspur. And this is a bit of a late sort of kind of explanation and kind of sort of I would say, defense of the decision made with Doherty going and Emerson staying. I was meant to put this out a lot earlier, actually, well before the Man City game, but kind of just due to unforeseen circumstances, just didn't really see the opportunity to put it out in time and also, I think, conveniently. So I actually was able to sort of let this one cook a little bit. And it's actually, I think, going to turn out even better now after Emerson's stunning, even close to man of the match performance last night against Man City. But this is really more of an explanation, right, of how this all transpired with Doherty going on a free contract, a mutual agreement, and terminating his contract, and Emerson staying. I'm kind of going to break down sort of the logic behind it, kind of where Spurs went wrong, maybe why the decision was made, kind of all that sort of stuff. And I'm also going to kind of give you guys some reasons for why maybe I also defended not Doherty. I have tried to defend both, but defending Emerson in the past, and also maybe the logic behind kind of keeping Emerson. So hit that like button if you do enjoy this, and also apologies for kind of putting this out a little late as well. But let's get into maybe why Spurs actually canceled Doherty's contract. I feel like they still wanted to keep Spence and Hill, right? They sent them out on loan. Those are kind of two guys they still want to sort of see if they can break into the first team eventually. They've invested a lot into them, and they do have a lot of time on their hands. They have a lot of development still to do. So those are kind of guys that you aren't going to really look to sort of maybe move on permanently. Whereas the likes of Matt Doherty, he is actually one that is 31 years old. He's only has 1 year left on his contract. I believe his contract went up in 2024. Whereas with Spence and Hill, I think they still have plenty of time at this club. And so they did probably see it where they had to loan out Spence and Hill, but they wanted to loan out Doherty as well. But it wasn't really the case that they could loan him out in the same sort of kind of circumstances where it was like a loan option, a loan with no option to buy. He also, as well, was going to really be, if he stayed, the third right wing back in the team. And we saw what happened to the third right wing back in Conte's team, which was Jed Spence in the first half of the season. Jed Spence, played like 41 minutes of football. I would imagine Doherty would sort of probably get a little bit more than that, but I don't really think he would get really like more than 200 minutes maybe for the rest of the season. So that's another thing as well, is like, is it really worth paying him, what he earns, for the rest of the season as the third right wing back? Probably not. And then also another thing that people have kind of been frustrated with, as well as maybe just, are a bit confused by. I have tried to see the logic behind it. I've tried to sort of vouch for it and defend it, but Conte has always seemed to have preferred Emerson over Doherty. When he first took over the job from Nuno, I think we saw Emerson playing plenty more minutes still over Doherty. It was until that period where Emerson Wright was deeply frustrating us in a lot of ways going forward. And then he kind of gave Doherty, I believe, a chance. And Doherty absolutely took it last season and was absolutely in flying form until he got that injury. And it felt like maybe everybody just assumed once Doherty was kind of back to full fitness, he would get his spot back from the likes of Antonio Conte. And he just didn't. Like, Antonio Conte felt like he didn't really see the same Doherty. I think he had some quotes of that in the past where he felt like it wasn't the Doherty from last season. He wasn't seeing the motivation. He just simply even went as far as to say, like, I picked the right wing back that I think will help me win these games. And I'm not stupid, I think, is even he's went as far as to say when defending his choice of Emerson over Doherty. So he's had plenty of occasions where he's made it quite clear that he does prefer Emerson over Doherty, and this season alone has proven it. And then also as well, even when he first took over the job, he seemed to have preferred actually the likes of Emerson over Doherty. And I think you can see is maybe for a few reasons, maybe why he does, but I'll get into that later. But those are maybe some of the reasons as to why they just canceled the contract, as I think Antonio Conte wanted to cancel it. The third right wing back, doesn't really get that much playing time in the first place. And they couldn't just give him, that straight up loan like they kind of wanted to with Spence and Hill. He doesn't really get that sort of kind of privilege, you could say, because he's 31 years old. He doesn't have that much time left to really develop. That being said, though, this is not really Doherty's fault alone, is what I would say. And let me explain on that. This is really more of a result of really poor squad management, I think, in the past that has really caught up with Spurs. Jose Mourinho's window being a really good example, where pretty much all the players from Jose Mourinho's summer window are all gone. And I think Højbjerg is really the only sort of kind of, you would say, decent player that has actually come out of it and is actually probably keeping his spot in this sort of, team since that summer window. Region is gone. Joe Rodon is gone. Matt Doherty is now gone. Plenty of other players have now left since that Jose Mourinho summer window. And it just shows that the poor recruitment, the poor squad management in the past, where Spurs haven't really been ruthless with players they know who aren't good enough. Maybe examples being like Davinson Sanchez, Eric Dyer. We know the likes of as well, maybe Sassignon to a degree, maybe is, probably starting to, maybe drag on a bit. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just kind of picking out names, out of the hat here. But you know what I mean? There are a lot of players at this club that just sort of, I think, Spurs have kind of just kicked the can down the road, haven't really decided to sell or move on, and they've kind of paid the price for it. And the way they've paid the price for it is by having so many players out on loan this season, and all the players they've had out on loan. Some of them are doing well, some of them are doing okay, but they're not really taking that more ruthless approach of just, taking the loss and, taking the hit and just selling them on to other clubs. Some cases, though, some of these players really are not actually sellable. A lot of clubs don't really have any interest at all in buying them outright. So you do maybe have to loan them first. But again, I think it's not really Doherty's fault, that his contract was terminated. I think it's actually just more of a result of poor squad management actually of the past. The board hasn't really been that ruthless, like I said. So I just feel like he's just taken the fall for maybe their mistakes of not being more ruthless with other players like Sanchez, maybe like the likes of Dyer and other players that, Lucas Moura, other players that have really, kind of stayed here a little too long, and we all know really just aren't good enough and probably should have been sold, a while ago. And because of that, we now have just too many players out on loan or too many players that are on the books, and it's just had to terminate it. So it's not really exactly, I would say, Doherty's fault in this case. Hopefully, I was able to explain that at least decently enough. But this is actually why I'm happy with us canceling Doherty's contract. That being said, like I said, only 1 year left on his deal. No real sell-on value of any kind. I think he is 31 years old. He'd be turning 32 next January. So when you really look at it, like, are there really Premier League clubs that are going to be coming after him? I'm not so sure. Maybe championship clubs could be taking a look at him, but the likes of Atletico Madrid have seen maybe a chance and taken a shot at him for 6 months. But I just didn't really see his sell-on value being very much with only 1 year left on his deal. Him turning 32 also as well, like in 2024, felt like you were only going to really get like what 1, 2, 3 million out of it, and I feel like that's maybe being a bit generous as well. I could be being harsh, but I feel like that's being generous, especially when it comes to how other clubs maybe operate with very little money. They have to operate within their means. They're not going to overpay, I think, for players like Matt Doherty. So it did kind of make sense just to terminate the contract because you're not going to get very much out of it. Whereas maybe with a Sanchez, you can't really do that because you could get something out of it with Sanchez. Never earned really the favor of Jose, Nuno, or Conte as well. That's always been a big frustration of mine when it comes to Matt Doherty. I've never seen him, really, it seems like, get convincingly, I would say, kind of the, how would you put it, like the leg ahead, or he's never really been the first name in the team sheet for the likes of Jose, for the likes of Nuno, or Antonio Conte at any stage. Really, Antonio Conte was the only one where I can really recall him actually having a confident spell under him, but he still lost it, like we explained earlier, this season. Even after recovering from his injury, like I explained, he still lost it. Consistently has sat the bench behind the likes of Serge Aurier and Emerson, so it's not really like the competition has really been too strong, ahead of him. It's not like Hakimi or the likes of a Reece James or anybody is playing ahead of him. It's Emerson and Serge Aurier, and those two have been consistently preferred by any manager ahead of the likes of Matt Doherty. So that's, I think, another explanation for why I kind of just have always felt that he's never really been good enough to really play at this club, because we already have, it felt like, pretty average fullbacks in the first place, at this team, and he was never really getting picked amongst any manager ahead of them, which I think speaks more about him than it really does about the managers. And at the end of the day, he is a gooner. So there's also that where he, he doesn't really have, a huge passion, I would say, for the club, while being a really good guy, while being a really good character. Didn't really have, I would say, maybe the initial passion to play for Tottenham Hotspur. With Pedro Porro coming in, though, I feel like this is also another reason as to why they did cancel the contract, and another reason why he just didn't really have much of a future left with us. Doherty's edge, I think, over Emerson in the past was always his ability going forward. A lot of people kind of thought that with Doherty, he was just a bit more competent going forward, much more technically sound in a lot of moments than Emerson. Didn't lose his head in, certain moments like Emerson can, and also actually has a better finish, I think, than Emerson does when shooting as well, inside the box and everything. And so it really kind of made sense to keep Doherty around. before we brought in Pedro Porro, because Doherty had that sort of attacking edge, you would say maybe over the likes of Emerson, or at least that was in the case of a lot of fans' minds, very common, sort of opinion. But now that he's been sort of brought in, Pedro Porro, I feel like he kind of loses that edge and he kind of loses that, reason to be picked ahead of the likes of Pedro Porro. He loses that reason to be picked ahead of the likes of Emerson, because Emerson has that defensive edge over the both of them. Whereas, Doherty's edge before was having that, attacking, kind of threat that maybe Emerson doesn't have. But with the addition now of Pedro Porro, as well as like Jed Spence still developing out on loan, there's just no real kind of strength of Doherty's that other people don't have in the squad. And so then he kind of loses, I think, sort of his use, or really his, his X factor, you could say, in the team. Recently, I feel like also Doherty has also lost that will really to do anything positive. Last season during that incredible spell he had, he was making runs, inside the box. He was making late runs at the back post. He was skinning his man. He was making a clever, passes inside. He's just doing a lot of things that I feel like we haven't seen very much from him at all this season. And maybe that's to do with the energy, but or with the injury, or also just maybe having to do with the fact that he doesn't see really much of a place for him in the squad anymore. I feel like he started to kind of refuse to really beat his man in kind of one-on-one situations. He just kind of was reluctant, to do so. It felt like he just kept passing it back inside. He also was kind of not really playing those little 1-2s that I feel like he can be pretty good at. He likes to play that little 1-2 inside, make a run beyond from there, and he wasn't really doing that very much. Again, was just rather just pass it back inside to whoever he received it from. Not really making runs in behind that I feel like Emerson certainly does. And also, I felt like in that North London derby where he was dropped, actually, when Doherty looked like he was maybe getting preferred again over Emerson. He played in that North London derby and was actually dropped afterwards. And I think the reason he was dropped after that North London derby is because I thought he was actually bullied kind of physically in that game. I remember him losing a lot of aerial duels. I remember him just kind of being like a yard behind, or step behind the rest of the players. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of the rest of the Spurs players were I could kind of put the same sort of criticism towards, but at the end of the day, I think he lost his spot because when he was given that chance sort of again, after this new year, I feel like he was given some more opportunities by Conte. Maybe Conte was trying to sort of size up which one he wanted between Emerson and Doherty. And Doherty, I don't think, took his chance. And that North London derby game, I think, is a good example of it. And also, when I think, some of the criticisms that I brought up of Doherty, if you're already kind of turning this off, if you're already, frustrated with me, this is what I would say, though, is that even if you hate Emerson, I do feel like, you would have to admit he makes more runs in behind than Doherty does this season. He makes more of an effort, I think, to be open than what Doherty does. A lot of people say that Emerson is just left open. I think he actually makes more of an effort to try to be open and puts himself in good areas to receive the ball when necessary, or just to be that outlet, out of pressure. And also when building out a play, you see he likes to move inside to get the ball, move into, midfield if he needs to. He hugs the touchline. He'll make runs in behind. He'll do whatever he needs to in order to kind of create space for others, or also just to be that option in case someone needs it. Whereas I do feel like this season, and I do just mean this season alone, Doherty has just sort of lost that will, it feels like, to, sort of move about the plays and be, open for others and be that sort of outlet like I think Emerson does. And maybe you might think I'm wrong on this, but that's what at least I'm seeing. And also, I think we all know he is better physically, at least, than Doherty. I don't think there's any, argument over that. He's just much better at getting up and down the pitch. And I do think he's much better in the air. I think those are two important factors when it comes to being a fullback, maybe less so of being a wingback. But when it does come to being a fullback, you do need to have that, ability to get up and down the pitch. It is probably one of the more physically demanding kind of positions, I think, in the modern game. And then as well, it's also one where it is very useful to be very good in the air, because you have players like Mitrovic now, you have players like Nunez, you have Harry Kane in the league, Holland. You need guys that, can handle themselves physically, in the air, and also know what they're doing when clearing it, because there is kind of, I think, more of a resurgence of the big men, kind of in the box now. So I think also these small kind of fullbacks or wingbacks will kind of get bullied from time to time. So it's good to have maybe a player like Emerson just around in the squad in case you might need him. And one of my favorite things about him is that he has probably been one of the most slated and hated players in this, in the squad by the fan base. I think unnecessarily so. But what I do find impressive about him is that he hasn't given up. He just simply tries and tries and tries and tries and tries again. I mean, even if he fails and fails, he'll try and do it again. It's quite impressive. It's a really, I think, sort of, good mentality to have. Even if you are, failing, it is good to see somebody that just doesn't give up, just doesn't put his head down. He just continues to do it and just will do it again kind of shamelessly. It's actually quite comedic to a degree. And that's, all these things that I kind of have brought up here, maybe just recently, like I said, better than the air, that willingness to, make mistakes and try again, that willingness to be open and make more of an effort to make runs in behind, all that sort of stuff is just not what I've been seeing from Doherty this season. And there are things that I've been seeing actually more so from Emerson this season. So that's, I think, another reason as to why maybe Conte is just preferred, the likes of Emerson more so than Doherty. And I think Emerson should probably go eventually, but hear me out on this one. I don't think he's a bad influence in the dressing room, so there's not really a reason to get rid of him for that reason. He's always been well liked, seems to be very positive, seems to be a happy-go-lucky kind of guy, a bit of a happy clapper, if you will, type, player, kind of like myself, in the squad. And it seems like, a lot of people enjoy his company. He trains hard and has clearly owned, Conte's favor consistently ahead of the likes of actually Doherty and Jed Spence for reasons we may never really fully know, but it does seem like Antonio Conte does prefer Emerson over those two and always has, and does maybe enjoy him more in training by the looks of things. He does seem to maybe be a better trainer. And then also between Porro and Emerson, I do think Emerson is the more defensive option than the likes of Pedro Porro or Matt Doherty or Jed Spence. And I think that's going to be far more useful to Antonio Conte. We know Pedro Porro is by far the best attacking option that we now have, but do you want something slightly different in case you need, that something slightly different for games like Man City, for games like Liverpool, for games, like Chelsea, Man United, all the big top six teams where you will be put under pressure, by the opposing wingback or whatever, guy is out there. And you might need that defensive kind of edge. And Emerson is going to be that option where Doherty and Spence just simply won't be at this time being. Whereas Pedro Porro for, the teams that you want to be more attacking and you need more creativity is going to be absolutely brilliant for us. So I think it's a good sort of dynamic and a good sort of trade-off between the two. My kind of parting words for everybody here on this one is that Doherty, like I said, is an unnecessary victim of poor squad management of the past by Spurs. So it is hard to kind of compliment them for being ruthless, with the termination of his contract. I think it's just more him being a victim of really poor squad management and that catching up with them. Doherty's departure, though, did need to happen, and it did need to happen sooner than Emerson's, in my opinion, with the addition of Pedro Porro and Jed Spence as well. I just feel like Doherty was definitely the guy that needed to go first, especially since Conte has really taken a liking, I think, to Emerson. Then he had to really, he just kind of had to go, whether you like it or not. I think he's always, had a liking more for Emerson. And the likes of Jed Spence, I think, is more sort of a club, project, you could say, for the future. So it's kind of just always sort of been that way, where I think Doherty was just eventually going to be the first one to go. Emerson, I know, is a frustrating player, don't get me wrong, but I do encourage you to see the logic that I've maybe brought in this video, as well as the logic, that maybe we've seen from Conte use in the past, and, maybe the logic of why Conte is probably keeping him and probably prefers him. So I do kind of just ask you just to acknowledge it, even if you still disagree with it. Just hear me out and just try to maybe see some of the reasons that maybe I brought up today, just because I feel like maybe some of them probably have come through. Maybe some of them you just think are ridiculous, but I bet maybe one or two little nuggets out of this video probably does explain why that decision was made with keeping Emerson and maybe letting Doherty go. And no player, I feel like, deserves the treatment. Lastly, I'll say no player deserves the treatment that I feel like Emerson has received. But if you think he does deserve it, then there are far, far, far worse players in our past that deserve that type of energy, that deserve that type of treatment. I don't think anybody does deserve that type of treatment at this club and that type of energy that Emerson has received. But if you do think that someone does, I feel like there have been far, far worse players at this club who have disrespected this badge more so than Emerson has. Examples even being recently Ndombele, Lo Celso, Serge Aurier, and so on. So I do feel like it is kind of a bit out of place to sort of being, he's one of the most criticized players I've ever seen at this club. And I do feel like it's a bit unwarranted, considering I don't think he's ever disrespected the badge in the way that even previous, recent players have, like Ndombele, Lo Celso, and others have, and Serge Aurier, I think, as well. But everybody, that's my video here. Please hit that like button on your way out. Just a bit of an explanation on everything kind of related to why Spurs have gone, with keeping Emerson and letting Matt Doherty go. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Didn't try to gloat too much on my defense of Emerson, but do hit that like button, please, if you enjoyed this. And feel free to disagree with me in the comments, agree with me in the comments, whatever it is. Please leave a comment down below and give me your thoughts on this. But that'll be all for now. Come on, you Spurs, and in Conte I trust. We'll be seeing ya. Everywhere we go.